Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Annemarie McAvoy, who is a nationally recognized expert in financial crimes. Annemarie, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, so looking at your bio, we're looking at anti-money laundering and cryptocurrency and bribery and corruption, and it sounds like you could write 4 books just on those kind of things. But give us a little bit of background and what led you to become an expert in financial crimes? Because I don't remember going through college seeing a major in financial crimes, a Bachelor of Science.
Well, and ironically enough, in college, I hated numbers. I hated math. I hated all of that. I didn't like it. So this is a field that I tell my students when I teach as an adjunct up at Columbia, it's Graduate School of International Public Affairs. Yeah, I tell them, don't necessarily look at things and think, do I like that or do I not? Sometimes things develop and you wind up learning to really like something you thought you hated, which is what happened with me. So I graduated from Fordham Law School, and then I went to Mudge Rose, which was a very fancy Wall Street law firm at the time, which no longer exists. But from there, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And I loved that job. I was in the civil division for about 3 years, and then I spent a couple of years in the criminal division. It was fantastic experience. I did all kinds of cases, and there were some money laundering cases involved and some financial crimes cases, bank robberies, drug cases, all kinds of stuff. So that was an exciting job. And then I had a friend over there who had another friend who was at Dean Witter, which was the precursor of Morgan Stanley, and they were looking for someone with trial experience. And in fact, the first time they asked me to go interview, I said, nah, I'm not interested. I'm in the criminal division. This is great. I don't want to go. And then a year later, they were again looking for somebody, and my very good friend, who's still one of my closest friends, said, basically I'm just going to push you and keep after you until you go over there and interview. Because at that point we'd had 3 U.S. attorneys in less than a year. So there was a lot of chaos and the office was changing. So I went. I liked it. They were really nice. I told them I don't know anything about securities law, and they said, don't worry about it. We'll teach you. It'll take you 6 months to learn, but you'll learn it. And I went there. It was one of the nicest jobs, probably the nicest job I ever had, and spent about 5 years there. Then I went to Citigroup, and I was there after it became Morgan Stanley as well. And then I went to Citigroup and wound up also doing, and at Dean Witter, actually, that's where I started with the financial crime stuff, because I wound up handling everything of a criminal nature that came in the door. And I was there when anti-money laundering was not the really interesting hot area that it is post 9/11. Yeah. So I was there really at the beginning when they really started it. We were doing voluntary reporting in the securities industry back then. Now it's all mandatory. And so I was there at a really good time, and I learned the stuff, and it was interesting, and I liked it. And then continued over at Citigroup, got involved, ran their internal investigations unit for a while. Developed anti-money laundering training globally, did a lot of training over there. It was interesting. And then I left there, and my life took a little detour. I have a wonderful son who had some developmental issues when he was young and needed a lot of therapy. And so I started doing consulting, and it turned out that having that background in financial crimes was really, really helpful. So I was able to work on some big fraud cases and investigations. I was able to work on anti-money laundering issues from a compliance standpoint as a consultant, and have flexibility so I could be around for my son, which was a godsend. And that's when I started teaching. I started teaching at Fordham Law School a class on anti-money laundering and terrorist financing, which I believe was undoubtedly the first class of its kind in the country. And I taught there for about 12 years before I started at Columbia. And then I went to the DA's office. Just at the end of, we had a wonderful DA named Joe Hines towards the end of his tenure, and I knew him from Fordham, and he said, what would you like to work on? And I like the financial crimes stuff, so I wound up developing an area over there where I was working on some really big financial crimes cases, which was not something they normally did over there. So left to my own devices, able to do whatever I wanted to do. I like the financial crime stuff. So, and then I went to EY for a little while, and now I have a legal practice. I also have my company, which I set up, which is it keeps me busy, which is great.
Yeah, sounds like it. And, through all of those, I've noticed a couple little things that I think is always neat to point out. So many of those moves were because you knew someone, had been connected, stayed in touch, networked, and that's just the way that business happens these days. I think that we need to build our reputation because people externally need to see what we're doing and that we're authoritative and experts, but then also that other element of word of mouth and network is just so huge. Is that kind of what you find in some of your business development today through building your practice?
Absolutely, and I always tell my students you have to be networking and try to keep in touch with people. Today it's not that hard to do. You have LinkedIn, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have emails. It's easy enough to keep in touch with people, at least to some extent, because especially as you go higher up in positions, it becomes more and more important that you network, because they're less likely to just take somebody based on a resume. They want to know who they're dealing with, and usually I find at least that those higher level positions are usually from recommendations. I mean, they may interview various people for a position, but usually most of those folks come through someone recommended them. So it's very important.
Yeah, exactly. Let's kind of move into, you are a woman-owned firm. Was that an objective that you had, or did it just happen that way that you founded the company with yourself and some co-founders as a woman-owned firm?
It kind of just happened. I had some friends. We've been talking for a while about starting something, and it turned out that the ones who were really most devoted to the idea of starting this company were the women. The men tended to kind of come and go a little bit, and weren't as they just weren't into working as hard to really get it started, which is a big part of the work in having a business, which I've definitely learned. That initial, and again, it goes back to networking and talking to people and being at events and talking about your company, letting people know what you do, and that takes a lot of time and effort. I found that some of the guys who had gotten involved initially, who wanted to become part of the company, they just wanted, where's the work? It's like, well, you have to get your name out there to get the work, as part of this business. So my company actually was really an outgrowth. I have McAvoy Consulting as well for very small things that I can do on my own. And what happened is I wound up getting enough work that it warranted having some help. So rather than just bring people in to help me, I thought it'd be good to set something else up, something in addition. And then the other thing was, in the market, you have a lot of consulting firms that are kind of bureaucracies. You don't have many that are you have a lot of sole practitioners like my McAvoy Consulting, and then you have a lot of the big companies, and certainly have the big EYs and Price Waterhouse, stuff like that. But the ones even in between are pretty big and bulky, and they do things by the project, and they're expensive, and you can't just have them come in for a couple of hours of work and things like that. So I also saw an opening in the market to have something where we have a number of people who are part of the company, but then we also bring in people on an as-needed basis, depending on the project, and everybody works remotely, so we keep costs down. So it's a much more nimble business model, much more like a fintech company than a traditional consulting firm. But again, you have to kind of get the word out there, and you need the people who are willing to work to do that. And it turned out the women were most excited about doing this together. So we wound up being women-owned. We don't mind having men too, but it wound up being the majority is women-owned.
So one thing that I am curious about is, we could probably spend 14 and a half more hours just on, and there's this one case that we did this, and one time.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some of them? What's your kind of your wheelhouse? If an organization is having like potential issues, what are some things they could notice in the organization that they might go, you know what? We want to catch this before it's an issue. We don't want to, call Annemarie before there's a big problem. What are some red flags that they could be watching for?
Well, certainly anything unusual that's going on where you start to stop and you say to yourself, wait a second, this is odd. It could be employee behavior. It could be if you're a financial institution and you have accounts and you have an account where if something just doesn't feel right, or you find some unusual activity, because a lot of times you're not sure what it is until you actually look at it. So we can come in, and I find that a lot of times unusual activity, it could wind up that it's just an internal investigation, and it really, you find you have a problem with your systems, or you have an employee who's just not trained properly or something like that, where, and that's it. You just need to kind of fix your internal problem and take care of it. But sometimes it winds up being something that does need to be reported. There are suspicious activity reports. They have to be filed. If you don't file them, you don't have a good compliance program, you can wind up being fined. There are banks that have been fined in the billions, literally billions of dollars over compliance problems. So, we can come in and we can do just check your systems, just check and look, how are your policies and procedures? Are their procedures being properly implemented? Are they too bulky? Do they need to be adjusted better, and so that your business people can follow them more easily? And do they need to be adjusted based on new changes in the law and regulations? So we can do that kind of work as well. And companies wind up having fraud problems, again, internal, it could be an external issue. We can come in and help and do those types of investigations as well. Sometimes there's an employee complaint of, perhaps sexual harassment, things like that. We can do those types of investigations. The nice thing with me is I've also done a lot of all of this work. I've done it on the legal side as well as on the compliance and internal investigation side. So I understand the ramifications, and I understand what to look for to help if there does wind up being down the line some sort of a legal issue involved, where the lawyers have to get involved. You can tee it up properly. You know what to look for. You know what's important, which is a help, because a lot of the folks in consulting, it's another problem. A lot of them don't understand the legal issues as well because they're not lawyers. So I kind of cover both bases to an extent, since I have the knowledge to be able to at least understand what the ramifications are. And on that point, we also actually do crisis management as it relates to legal cases and regulatory issues, because, again, as a lawyer, I understand the issues. And the other thing is I do a lot of, I go on TV and radio and things like that as a legal expert. And I've done that for many, many years now with all kinds of outlets. So, Reuters, AP, MSNBC, Fox News, you name it, I've probably been on there. And so I know what they look for when they talk about legal cases, and I know what flies, what doesn't, how the questions will be asked, what they're looking for, and how to do those types of things. So many times the PR firms, they use people who were former bookers at these stations. They have marketing people with marketing degrees who, again, don't understand the legal ramifications of sometimes what they're suggesting. And they also don't understand necessarily what's really going on in a case. So I can read the case documents and know what it says, whereas a non-lawyer would have difficulty doing that. And I can look at it and read those documents and figure out what may happen next year or the year after in the case. Again, a non-lawyer wouldn't have that background. But because I've kind of become a jack of many trades to an extent of having done a lot of things in my career, I have a lot of understanding of what can happen and how best to handle things. So we also
I would even say it's not even a jack of many trades, because that kind of is the connotation of you do a lot of things a little bit okay, but you do one thing really well. Right,
yeah.
And you bring a unique flavor and a unique competitive advantage to the table, where a firm's typical outlet would be, let's call an attorney or let's bring our in-house counsel in, but they have some blinders on because they've only seen what they've seen. And you've seen such a broad spectrum, and you can see kind of what's coming around the corner and down the pike because of what your experience has given. Is that a good kind of a representation of one of the main benefits of working with someone like your firm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you bring in the outside counsel, they rarely have worked in-house. So they haven't actually ever worked in a company. They've only worked in a law firm. So they know the law, and they know how to handle things in a courtroom, most likely, but they don't understand what it is to deal with, who's going to write the check, who's going to pay the bills, how to handle people on the business side who you have to interview, who may not want to be involved and may not understand the importance, and how to handle all of those sort of the real internal issues that are very real to the folks who have to deal with them day in and day out. But to the lawyers, they're just not familiar with them. So again, having worked in-house, having worked on the prosecution side, and having dealt with a lot of regulatory issues, I understand also what it is for the regulators looking at it from the outside, kind of what they're looking for when they're doing their investigation. So if you're helping the company, you want to do it in a way that you keep the regulators happy so that they don't fine you, and that you're responsive. And a lot of that is in the attitude with how you deal with them, how quickly you can get the documents to them, and to some extent it really is attitude. And again, when you can talk to them and say, well, I'm a former prosecutor myself, and they know they have somebody like that on the team for the company working there, they know it's being handled properly, and they deal with you in a different way. I had one case, I had an Asian bank, and they were really trying, and the regulator was being so difficult and really kind of nasty to them on their calls. And I said to the client, I said, you know what? I said, why don't you let me talk to them?
Yeah.
And I spoke to them. One call with them wasn't even a long call. Once they knew I was there, they stopped. They knew we were doing what needed to be done. I was able to explain it, and they were fine then. But up until the point where I got on the phone with them, they were so difficult to deal with for this particular bank. So, when you can tell them, look, I'm a former prosecutor myself, and, they understand that you're there to do the right thing and to help and to get things taken care of. And that bank did not get fined. They made the fixes they needed to do. We trained them so that they knew what they needed to do, and everything went fine after that.
Do you ever watch Shark Tank?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you ever watch Shark Tank?
Oh, no. I know somebody who was on there, though, but I haven't actually watched it.
One of the things, you just said something that I feel is so important that I want to kind of wrap up with this, but make the point for you because it's really, really huge. One of the, like venture capitalists, you can go out and get venture capital from many, many places. You don't need sharks. But what many of the sharks will say, here's the issue that you will be facing. You need to accomplish, what you just described, and you can go to a venture capitalist firm, and they can bring some money to you, but guess what you will not get? You will not get that return phone call from those high-level buyers or whatever.
That's true.
Meaning, when Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, makes a phone call and someone says, Mr. CEO, Kevin O'Leary's on the phone from Shark Tank, they pick up the phone or they call back, and that's the power they bring. What you just described was your in-house or your people, you might try to just, the problem is you are not coming from that area of expertise and experience, and you're going to be spinning your wheels like you described. And when someone like yourself can come in and just cut right to the chase, speak from confidence, being an educator and advocate for your client, they realize that, okay, we got an expert on the team. Let's now, use the secret language, use the word, once I'm sure that there's some phrases and words that you use that, would alert these people that like, okay, she knows what's up. And not that it's right or wrong. It's just your experience brings so much power in the hammer to a situation. And whatever your fee is should be far outweighed by the reduction of time and stress and probably a whole lot of money and effort as well. But I just think that was a really, really big point that I wanted to bring up there.
Right. And it actually also reminds me, part of what we're trying to do with Clovis Quantum Solutions is also, and maybe it comes from, the kind of the women's perspective, but we want to be there to help people. So one of the things that we can do, and we've set up ourselves in a way that we can be more flexible. That also means that we can take the call when somebody has a problem, and we can do a couple of hours of work for them if that's all they need. We can come back in a year and spend a few hours, or in 6 months, or if they have a problem 2 months after we finish our project. Most consulting firms are not set up that way. They have to have it on a project basis. It has to be approved by whatever committee internally approves what projects they're taking on, and they can't just do a couple of hours worth of work. So that's where, we want to be there so that if people have a question, they can pick up the phone and they can call us and they can get an answer. When you're dealing with the normal consulting firms, you can't do that. You have to have a much more formal, long-term, larger agreement in order to be able to do that. So that's where, too, especially for smaller companies, for cryptocurrency firms, for startups, they just don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to always, do these big projects. Sometimes they need somebody that they can just reach out to and get some help, and that's what we're here for as well.
Awesome. Well, that is so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And let's give listeners the best way to reach out and connect with you and learn more about your practice.
Oh, I appreciate it. My company's name is Clovis Quantum Solutions. It's clovisquantum.com is the website, and you can reach me at Annemarie.clovisquantum, Annemarie@clovisquantum.com. So, and I'm also on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. So also any of those media, you can reach out to me as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks a million for your time. It was wonderful getting to know you.
Nice to talk with you too, and thank you for doing this. We appreciate it at Clovis as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.